Over his 63-year reign, Norman Balon was known for barking insults at hapless tourists, especially those in shorts, drunken regulars, and the eclectic cast of characters who haunted the coach and horses in Soho. These included well-known artists such as Francis Bacon, celebrated criminals such as Brian the Burglar, policemen, shoplifters, prostitutes, self-proclaimed poets, and every down-and-out misfit Soho had to offer. A cantankerous, irascible, foul-mouthed pub baron self-styled Britain's rudest landlord, Balon became so entangled with the words, "You're barred," that his ghost-written autobiography, which he claimed never to have actually read, was called "You're Barred, You Bastards." Yet his loyal customers came back again and again. Even his mother, whom he once barred for being too boring and, in his words, past it.
Welcome to Last Rites. This week we'll be looking at the life of Norman Balon, who called himself Britain's rudest landlord and reigned in Soho from about the 1950s until the 2000s. Now, this is a bit of a shifting gear. Georgia, you chose Norman Balon as our subject this week, so I think you're going to have to justify why people should care about a pub landlord. And also, I think I should say, as a warning to our listeners, that given the nature of our subject this week, it's probably going to contain quite a lot of foul language, has to be said. So Georgia, why did you want to choose Norman Balon as our subject this week?
I love these obituaries, and I've done a few of them, of people who sit just on the edge of artistic genius or brilliance or fame. So we've run obituaries of a famous vet to Hollywood stars, or the hairdresser who overheard so much gossip that he could write a kind of memoir about, the dirty secrets of actors and actresses. With this one, I love that he, did one thing and one thing only, which was essentially to rule with an iron fist this pub, which was a watering hole for Britain's chronic drinkers in one of the sort of most well-oiled decades in one of the sort of most debauched places, which was Soho in the 50s and 60s. And we'll talk a lot about that particular kind of creative melting pot that was Soho. More than that, there's something quintessentially British about this story. And, we've done Americans and we've done someone from Canada. I really wanted to choose someone who represented something very, very British. And I think he sort of does in the best and worst way. Possibly he shows us our worst flaws, which is that not only do we love pubs, but we have this sort of masochistic relationship with incredibly rude and aggressive pub barons. There's something about the British character that revels in the rudeness. Maybe it's a kind of an instinct for self-flagellation or a need to please. But when it came to Norman, however rude he was, and he built such a reputation for this, he wielded such power that people came back again and again.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll get onto this later on, but surely one of the reasons why people kept coming back to this pub, despite his extraordinary rudeness, this pub, the Coach and Horses in Soho, is that it was the place where the who's who of London were drinking at this time. I mean, Pete O'Toole, the actor, drank there. John Hurt drank there. Basically, all of the journalists on Fleet Street, it was the office, the unofficial office of Private Eye. So presumably that's a big reason why he was able to be so rude, because it was such a kind of meeting place for the sort of literati or the sort of debauched literati of London.
Yes, although there were other places in Soho, such as the French House, which was an even greater...
Yeah, and Muriel's, right?
Yeah, an even greater meeting point in a way. I think what defined Coach and Horses wasn't necessarily the artists and bohemians. It was the petty criminals and we'll talk about people like Billy the Burglar, because they've got fantastic stories. There's someone called Sid the Swimmer. We'll leave listeners to guess on why he's called Sid the Swimmer until later on.
Well, I'm dying to know right now.
Okay, well, he was known to not keep financially above water.
It's actually less exciting.
I know, it's a little bit lame, isn't it?
Okay, so let's talk about how he came to own the Coach and Horses, this amazing pub in Soho. So he's born in 1927 in Essex to a Jewish family, but an atheist Jewish family. The family then moves to Bournemouth, where his parents run these kosher hotels. So they have two of these kosher hotels. But during the war, during World War II, one of those hotels is bombed. So the family moves to London. Now, Norman, he goes to technical college, but he leaves at 16 when he gets the call from his parents that they've just bought this pub, the Coach and Horses, in Soho. And so the very afternoon that he leaves technical college, he is working behind the bar at the Coach and Horses.
Yeah, and when he arrives, it's creaky, it's sticky floored, it's dark, it's not particularly cozy. And it didn't really change. It stayed this kind of dilapidated old place. On their first night, he recalled finding 22 mice in a beer slop bucket. But he was happy there because he didn't really much like school. He was really good at maths, actually, but he was a bit of a class clown. He was a bit of a joker, and he just decided that he was happy to work behind the bar and drink. He got to drink whatever he wanted, and according to the Telegraph obituary, which is fantastic on this, he was sort of putting away a bottle of scotch a night. He's 16 at this point. But when he eventually takes on the reins of the pub from his dad, who becomes a fire inspector, he becomes teetotal. So he stops drinking and he stops smoking. We have to remember this is the time when every pub, every cafe, every train station was filled with great plumes of smoke. But he stops smoking and drinking, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and Diet Coke becomes his drink. Maybe not Diet Coke, full fat, manly Coke becomes his sort of drink of choice.
I don't know whether they have Diet Coke at that point. But
well, I don't think he would be drinking it, actually.
He definitely wouldn't be drinking it. Because actually, just to say, he has this great sort of ample frame, stooping gait. He's got this great,
very tall man.
A very tall man. He's got this great presence about him. And he's very proud of being sober in an establishment like this. He thinks it's very important. And he later successfully sues a journalist who describes him as crapulous.
What is that? I've never...
So crapulous basically just means being in a state of hangover, just being hungover, basically.
So one is crapulous.
One is crapulous. I'm not sure it's in modern usage, but I don't think the writer realised how damaging that description would be to a pub landlord.
I love the idea of a pub landlord suing someone for
being like, I'm not bloody unhealthy.
So everyone else is obviously drinking and smoking around him, even if he's staying sober. So can you just paint a picture for us of the pub in the sort of 50s and 60s? Who are the clients at this point?
So just to go a little bit earlier than that, during the war, so we're starting his baronship, his reign during the war. And this is mostly like American soldiers, the kind of people you would imagine, also petty criminals and Maltese gangsters who run the Soho sex trade. Soho is a pretty seedy place at this point. But in time, after the war, and in the kind of grey years of post-war austerity, it becomes this great nest of creativity, of debauched creativity. I mean, these are chronic drinkers. These are career alcoholics and bohemians, people like Dylan Thomas, Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, Frank Albach, as you've mentioned, actors Peter O'Toole, John Hurt, Tom Baker. So it becomes this incredibly creative place, but it is also frequented, and I love this image, by the kind of criminal underbelly of Soho. And I want to talk a bit about who they are, because when I was researching this over, I just had the biggest fun, which is actually partly why I wanted to pick it this week. It's just out of it's sort of out like a Dickens novel. So we have a notorious criminal called Brian the Burglar, real name Brian Reader, which is less interesting.
Right.
He was known more recently for being the ringleader of the £14 million Hatton Garden safe deposit heist in 2015. So he was obviously going on for a long time.
Sorry, he was still doing stuff in 2015.
Yeah. Then we've got someone called Bookshop Billy, who was an Irish author, a New York City firefighter, a legal bookie, and he's famous for writing these tell-all novels detailing his sort of debauched life of gambling. This is almost my favourite. You get these women who are euphemistically called hostesses of Soho, and they're prostitutes, called French Vera and No Knickers Joyce.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sid the Swimmer, the aforementioned Sid the Swimmer, who was a petty crook.
Really disappointing that it wasn't from swimming away from someone.
I know. I mean, I'm trying to think what kind of Thames-related crimes we could think of with Sid the Swimmer, but it's not that. It was because he was always trying to keep his head above water financially. And last but very much not least, Ironfoot Jack.
Okay, so you've got to tell us about Ironfoot Jack, because when I was reading the script for this, his name jumped out at me. I mean, who was Ironfoot Jack? What was his trade? Tell us about him.
So his real name was Jack Neebs, and he was an Australian-born British nightclub owner. He eventually came to Soho and he ran this nightclub that was very gay and lesbian friendly and was seen by the police at the time as a sort of den of iniquity. And there was this massive raid, and he essentially was arrested and sentenced to 20 months hard labour. But he was this kind of larger-than-life figure who had this sort of great long hair and a long black cape draped over this shortened leg that was elevated with a heavy iron boot. So he would kind of clamp his way into these Soho clubs and pubs. It's so atmospheric. I love it.
Okay, so we've got these famous actors and writers rubbing shoulders alongside these sort of Dickensian figures who sort of crawl out of the underworld of London. And, you know, Private Eye would run a sketch series called Regulars, which was based off of the kind of figures who the cartoonist would see in The Coach and Horses. But the most famous of these figures was a journalist named Geoffrey Bernard.
So Geoffrey Bernard is crucial to the story because one might argue, and I possibly would argue, that Norman Balon, as the persona that he was and became, was invented by Geoffrey Bernard. So Geoffrey Bernard was the kind of unofficial chronicler of Soho and all its debauched, low-life characters, whatever you want to call it.
Well, that was the title of his column for The Spectator, wasn't it? Low
well,
life.
actually, yeah, exactly.
I try to get all my work done by 11. There are always deadlines to meet. I make mine opening time, whatever the editors may say. Not that I always wait for opening time to have a drink. My first port of call is the Coach and Horses in Greek Street. I use it as an office as well as a watering hole. It was working for Private Eye that first got me using it regularly, now it is a contact point. Norman Balon, the governor of the Coach and Horses, has been in the pub for his entire working life. He's welded to the place. A lookalike for Walter Matthau, he prides himself on his bad manners and even has the phrase, the rudest publican in London, printed on the pub matchboxes.
And Norman Balon was an almost weekly feature. And he would sort of write about Balon's incredibly rude comments. One went, his egomania and what passes for his wit has all but emptied the pub. That being Balon has emptied his own pub. So the myth of Norman Balon, aka Britain's rudest landlord, is kind of curated by Geoffrey Bernard.
And I mean, the reason it's curated by him and that he's referring to it is because he's writing these dispatches from the Coach and Horses. I mean, you know, he basically
Probably
used it.
Incredibly drunk.
He used it as his office. I mean, he would get there at opening time at 11 o'clock and, you know, sit there and write his column, Low Life. And actually, there was a play that was made about Geoffrey Bernard called Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell, starring Peter O'Toole in the 1980s. And the plot of the play is that Bernard is stuck in the Coach and Horses overnight, waiting for Norman Balon to come and open the pubs. It's sort of waiting for Godot, but with Balon as the thing he's waiting for.
I could die here. It's a good thing I can hold this stuff tolerably well. I mean, if I were a Yob or a Hooray Henry, by the time the pub opens again, I could be one of those cases found by the coroner to have choked on their own vomit. Disgusting phrase! When did you hear of anyone choking on someone else's vomit?
When that play came out, he liked calling it my play, proudly. Yeah. And legend has it that after the first night of the play, he sort of punched the air and said, I'm immortal. You know, he enjoyed the fame the small slice of fame, albeit this brought him.
Yeah, I mean, him and Geoffrey Bernard definitely had this sort of relationship where they both contributed towards each other's mythology. And as you said, it was a really sweet, tempestuous, but ultimately very loving relationship. And when Geoffrey Bernard was ill later on in life, Balon would come and visit him in hospital. He really cared for him during his illness. So that's a real example of what you read about Balon, which is that he's obviously got this incredible temper and this rudeness to him. But at the same time, beneath that, he is a bit of a softie, I think, and he has a really kind heart, and he really sort of cared for his regulars. I mean, what he said about Bernard was that, I didn't want him drinking where someone didn't care about him. So he really saw himself as this sort of matronly figure looking after the regulars in his pub.
So British about that, and so British and male about that, isn't it? Sort of like slightly gruff and grumpy, but actually deep down, if you really sort of scrape the skin of it, they've got a great relationship. And because he was, people thought he was charming and warm, which is why I think that it's partly like a bit of a performance.
So let's talk about that performance.
Yeah.
We really should put some flesh on the bones about, him being this rude pub landlord. I mean, can you give some examples? I mean, how was he rude?
So those he objected to included, quote, vile young people drinking out of bottles. Also, foreign tourists, both in shorts, as we said before, but also, quote, with their fucking 2 glasses of lemonade and 3 straws. Obviously, his mother. Let's talk a bit about that. So he bars his mother for being boring and past it. I think fair.
I don't believe that one.
Also, what's quite sweet is that obviously his mother bought the pub and bequeathed it to him. And she was still going there in her 90s, just kind of waddle along with her pub bag.
She used to help out in the pub, didn't she, as well? So I don't know if that's a barring. That's more of a firing, I think, than a barring.
Probably a firing. It's probably you're past it. You can't do the dishes anymore. It also included Neil Kinnock, the Labour leader who Balon claimed he kicked out because I don't talk to has-beens.
I think what I like about that is there's no politics in that statement. I don't talk. That's a sort of completely apolitical statement to say I don't talk to has-beens. So I think that's sort of fair enough.
And we had Neil Kinnock sitting just there, actually. And somebody said, that's Neil Kinnock in the bar. Why don't you go and speak to him? I said, well, he doesn't pay any more for his pint of beer than you do. Why? And you're a regular customer. That's the first time he's been in here in 6 months.
Okay, well, I mean, this begs the question, and I think it leads us into a kind of broader question of why the British people love rude pub landlords. Like, what is it that a rude pub landlord does for the British psyche that means that they are sort of lionized? Because actually, as we were preparing for this episode, I went back and had a little look at the history of rude landlords, or if not rude landlords, then certainly the figure of the publican. So, the person owning the establishment.
Walk through any English market town and you'll find the inn at the centre of its life. On market day, the people from the country around meet there to discuss the trend of prices, their children's health and their home affairs.
And I came up with a theory about why landlords actually have to be rude. And it's because for much of their history, pubs, and they've had various different names, ale houses, etc. But throughout their history, pubs have always been quite besieged institutions in the sense that if a pub was being too disorderly, so was causing disorder in a particular village, then people would petition the justice of the police or the authorities to close the pub down. So actually, landlords were entrusted with keeping their regulars and their non-regulars in check. And so they did have to rule with something of an iron fist. So I actually think the rude landlord is a staple of British history because of the besieged nature of the pub.
Okay, that's a fantastic theory, not one that our listeners probably would have heard. Love it. Well, also, just to add to that, I mean, Balon probably needed to, as you say, rule with an iron fist in order to keep some kind of order in the pub in what was a pretty lawless place at the time, Soho.
And actually, I mean, as I understand it, I mean, this might be completely wrong, but from what I read, I think it was a pretty law-abiding establishment. And by that, I mean that I remember reading about how Balon said that he didn't let people fence their stolen goods in the pub. I mean, so, fencing is when you sell on stolen goods from within another establishment. And he didn't do that. And I think he came under sort of pressure for not doing that. So I think that he did maintain a sense of order. It's not necessarily the order that that many of us have recognized as order, but it had its own hierarchies and systems. He basically said, if you're boring, you're not welcome here.
So of course Soho is a specific place with its specific history of chronic drinking and pubs and creatives and debauchery. But you brought up the idea of there being a long history of rude landlords. Well, I did my own digging, and there are some absolutely fascinating, entertaining examples of Norman Balons from completely other different places in the UK and completely different times. So I want to talk a little bit about them because I think there's some interesting parallels to make. So one of the earliest was this man called John Fothergill, who presided over the Spread Eagle pub in Thames in the 20s and 30s. So he was known for having this blacklist, and on them were shop girls, salesmen, haughty females, people who only wanted to use the loos, people who only wanted to look at the garden, people who only dropped in to shelter from the rain, and anyone who requested mint sauce with their lamb, which I quite enjoy. Probably most famously is this man called Kim Hollick de la Taste Tickle, who ran the Tickle Arms outside Cambridge for 32 years. He had a notice outside his pub which would list the categories of people who he called the insufferables, who didn't want to come into his pub. Mostly these were people on the left. So what he called loony lefties, CND badge holders, so Campaign of Nuclear Disarmament, which in the 60s and 70s was massive among people on the left.
Yeah.
Men with long hair, probably from the CND.
Right.
Hippies, jeans, trainers. Women who played with candle wax is what I'm reading here. So I'm thinking that's just kind of standing in for most like hippie women. I don't really get that. And to evict customers, he would play Wagner at top volume or let his dog loose on the bar.
It's interesting. I mean, this is a slightly dark parallel, but in Los Angeles, that's how they eject homeless people from the subways.
Oh, Jesus.
When I was down there, they would play very loud classical music to make sure they didn't sleep there.
Christ. Okay, well, that's a cheery aside from Sam. I also want to include a few more examples, if I may. So one is Steve Cotton of the Baltimore Arms, who once said of his fee-paying customers, and I think that this is something Norman Balon would have said, "They come in here, they want beer and things. I didn't ask them to come in here." Just like fair. He later actually stood for MP of North Devon under the slogan, "Vote for me, you lazy bastards." And he also owned a cat called Osama bin Yard down.
Jesus. So what's your theory about why the British public are so drawn to rude pub landlords? Because if I may just give a transatlantic comparison, the American bar staff that certainly I've encountered are so friendly, it's actually quite disconcerting.
Oh my God, I actually completely agree.
And obviously that's to do with tipping and just obviously the sort of earnestness of the American culture more generally. But I found it incredibly disconcerting for someone to be so enthusiastic about the drink that I ordered. And it did make me realise that I've been socialised in Britain in a way to sort of expect a level of coldness from my bar staff. So is it just ingrained in the national psyche? Is it like rude French waiters? I mean, maybe that's a parallel.
Yeah, that's actually quite a good parallel. I think, no, because I think rude French waiters are often rude to, gormless Brits in Paris, whereas, pub landlords is...
There's a sort of tastefulness to their rudeness,
Yeah, but also, like, it's not just to foreigners, it's presumably to anyone.
Yes, yeah.
British pubs. I think, so I don't have one definitive theory like you do. I think, number one, we love pubs and we love beer and we love our local.
Yeah.
And I think there's a sense that like people come back again and again no matter what. Like people love going to their local watering hole. So that's a theory to explain why people go back again and again, even if they think that their landlord is a little bit rude. Number two, I do think it's this like aspect of the British character that revels in not being earnest and overly sweet and enthusiastic and being slightly rude. It's the part of us that loves irony, I think.
I think that's true. And also I think actually it's incredibly simple. And I think it is because when you go to a pub, you go up to the bar and order a drink at the bar. They don't come to you and serve you. And so I think table service, and I remember this during COVID, I think that would be the death of the rude landlord when it's table service in pubs. I think it's something about the fact
Well,
that
they could come over and kind of smash the plate down.
No, I understand that it's possible, but I think there's actually a sort of spatial element to it where
Yeah. I think it's also a culture.
you're coming to them and you want their approval.
Yeah, and actually even now, like I don't think you have very, very rude landlords, but everyone in London has a story of that person who gave them their drink incredibly rudely, like or who sort of like dismissed them or whatever. And I think that my second theory, which is universal, i.e. it could be in France, it could be in Germany, it could be wherever, is that like serving people drinks when it's busy and people are semi-alcoholics and they bloody want a drink, and I'm thinking here in the 50s and 60s Soho, you have to be a little bit rude. And possibly with Norman Balon, it started with a bit of rudeness, gruffness, natural gruffness. And then people kind of enjoyed it because it was like the Francis Bacons of the world thinking like, ooh, I kind of like this guy is kind of like telling me it as it is. He's direct. He's not kind of beating around the bush. I think Brits like that.
So obviously the Soho of Norman Balon's era is now gone, or largely gone. You know, now Soho is a place of tourists and relatively mild-mannered landlords. Do you think there's still a place for someone like Norman Balon, or is he very much a relic of the past?
I think that his performance or gruffness or grumpiness or surliness, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't stand up to today's standards. He wouldn't pass the offense test. Like, I think there is an element that like younger generations, many of whom would be the ones drinking in the pub, like wouldn't get the kind of grumpy old man
it's funny.
I
mean, yeah, because you know what, I
not agree with that.
Well, when I was reading about this, obviously the Spectator were very keen to fold this into a kind of culture war thing of, the Norman Balons of the world are dying out and now a man can't ever say what he wants anymore, and I was that wasn't the lesson that I certainly drew from his story, which is that he was someone who, had his flaws, of course had his flaws, wasn't perfect. But like, if we think about what Bohemia is, I mean, it's a place for non-conforming people to just live their lives. And I think that's kind of the...
But what do you think him being rude has to do with Soho being a Bohemian place? I mean, apart from the fact that these people came to his pub to drink, like, because I think we have to separate the myth of Norman Balon just being a pub landlord in a pub where Francis Bacon like came and drank from him being self-styled.
I think it's this.
landlord.
I think it's if you're running a place that is transgressive in some way, or that has a sort of slightly anarchic quality to it.
Oh, that pissed me off though.
Someone has to lay down the law.
No, but sorry, anarchic, this is so... Do you know what? We're really going to come down on different angles here, because anarchic is a classic way of being like, oh, it's like a little bit edgy. Like, he's not being edgy, like he's just being fucking rude. Like, I think it's funny.
No, sorry.
And I think, no, but I think this is interesting because like, he's just being a bit of a grumpy old curmudgeon,
No, but sorry, what I'm saying is that the establishment that he's running has this sense of chaos to it. And therefore, there needs to be a sort of benevolent dictator, a kind of Hobbesian figure who sort of floats above the whole thing and lays down the law in a dictatorial fashion.
Okay. Would not agree with the dictatorial bit. Also, I wouldn't agree that he floated above anything. He's right there in that.
Well, he's teetotal. It's a sort of floating.
He's definitely teetotal. I think it's, I think it's a curmudgeonly old, very British sensibility that I'm not sure we see around, and that's probably a good thing. I don't know, like if I want to go and order my pint, I probably don't want to be told to fuck off. Like,
I think
oh, you do. You've got the sadomasochistic.
I do. I want them to be really mean to me. In fact, when I was working as a waiter, I used to really enjoy it when customers were rude to me. So there is
we'll get onto that in the next episode. So to finish, I want to look at this idea that he, of course, was surly and grumpy, but there was this warmth beneath it all, right? And I think this gets to the heart of the idea that he was performing it to some extent, or that it was a persona created by Geoffrey Bernard and the play and his autobiography and obituaries now. A lot of people said that he was incredibly kind and generous. You mentioned earlier that when his regulars were in hospital or went through divorces or were grieving, he would be really, really there for them, which I think says a lot. And there's a quote that he says, which I think shows this contradiction between softness and hardness. So he says, "My brother, before he died, said, 'A lot of people hate you.' I got a bit upset about that. I thought about it and said, 'You're quite right. They hate me because I tell them the truth about themselves, which they can't stand.'"
Thank you for listening to this episode of Last Rites. Join us next week where we'll discuss another fascinating life.